I announced to my family that I was going to be the first woman president of the United States. Won't tell you how long ago that was. And I was met with, laughter, some concern, a few, can you hear me okay? A few bits of laughter, concern, and a few comments that were like, why would you want to do that? That's not a place for little girls, right? One time during a presidential election, when a result happened, I remember my mother crying because that GD draft dodger got elected as president. And when I graduated from college with a master's in philosophy, my grandfather said, well, you have a degree in BS, you might as well go to DC. So what did those lessons teach me? Politics is bad. Politics is dirty. It's not something little girls want to grow up and do, right? Now, at the same time, when I was a kid, one of my very first memories that I have is being bundled up in the cold and very carefully trying to carry a cup of coffee to my grandfather, who was standing outside this big building with all of his friends on strike at the paper mill in Kalamazoo, while my mom and my grandmother were back making chili for everybody. I also remember as a kid that my parents would wait, my mom would wait until my dad came home from work, and they would take both of my younger sisters and I with them to go vote in every election. And I remember too, when I was a kid, my dad, seeing that there was no soccer team for girls, decided to just start one. Because why should the boys be the only ones allowed to play soccer? So what did that teach me? Community is good. Watching out for each other is good, right? And what that was, I learned later, what that was showing me how to lead a political life. And it's a concept that I learned at the foot of a very dear friend of mine, Marie Wilson. Marie Wilson is the woman who started Take Your Daughters to Work Day. She was the president of the Ms. Foundation, and she was also the president of an organization called the White House Project that I had the great honor to work at and learn from her. And Marie would talk about how it was important for us to lead a political life. So while we might think that politics is bad, there is a place for political action in our everyday work, in our everyday life. Things that you're doing right now are political, even if you don't think about it. So what does it mean to lead a political life? It means to do things like Grace Lee Boggs said, to start by planting a community garden, to watch out for our neighbors, to follow the teachings of Martin Luther King and, fight against injustice, fight against discrimination. Look around you, see if does this group of people have a soccer team, but this group doesn't? Why is that? Shouldn't we do something about it? And in particular, I want to encourage more women to lead a political life. Because back when I was announcing to the world that I was going to be the first woman president, Shirley Chisholm was running for president. How many of you remember Shirley Chisholm? Shirley Chisholm was running for president, the first African-American woman to do so. And at that time, she said, at present, our country needs women's idealism and determination, perhaps more in politics than anywhere else. And I would argue that rings true, especially today. Right? So how many of you women lead a political life currently? Ish. Go ahead, ish here. I would argue that you probably already are leading a political life. Because what we tend to do as women is lead from the foot of the table. So when you look around every social movement, the civil rights movement, the women's movement, movements for fair housing, for economic justice, you will see women in the background doing the work of the infrastructure that it takes to change minds, to change policies. And it's time for us as women to move to the head of the table, to bring those ideas and those experiences that we've gathered leading at the foot of the table to the head of the table. And you can do that in a number of ways. You can run for president. Why not, right? You can run for your local offices. You can encourage other women to run. And I would encourage in particular in political sphere for us to encourage more women to serve in elected office, because there's research out there that shows when women are leading, especially if they've looked at Congress, they look at women legislators, and women legislators tend to introduce more legislation that specifically helps women, and that's not because they're a special interest group. That's because when you pass policies that specifically help women, you're also then helping families, which improves the economy. Women legislators also tend to pass more legislation. They tend to reach across party lines to find common consensus and get things done. They bring voices that aren't at the table to the table. And they also bring more money back to their districts. So when you see women legislators, they're working hard to get things done at home. And I would encourage more women in leadership, not just because of those things, because who doesn't want more money coming back to their district? But I would also encourage us to seek more diversity in our political leadership, because diverse bodies, diverse groups of people create more change and come to better solutions than groups of people who all look the same and think the same. There's research coming right out of the University of Michigan that shows that when they take groups of people who have a similar background, similar life experiences, similar education, and give them a problem, they're going to argue it and argue it and argue it and argue it. But when you bring diverse groups of people together and give them that same problem, they're going to argue it but come up with a solution. And why is that? Because we're all stuck at different places. We're all experiencing this life in a different way. So when you get more diversity looking at a problem, you're going to have an easier time coming up with what that solution is. And that's what's happening right now. You see this in our political landscape at the moment. So we have a lot of people arguing and arguing and arguing, right? And why is that? So I hear all sorts of answers, right? I hear it's because of who's serving, it's money in politics, it's special interest groups. I would argue it's that, which is apparently a secret because we don't talk about it, but I would argue that we have the problems we have today because the exact same people have been serving in government since the dawn of our democracy. Right? White guys. Rich white guys. Older, rich, straight white guys, right? And that's, nothing against our straight, rich white guys who might be in the room. But the problem is, when you have the same people serving over and over, it becomes about the power and keeping the power and maintaining the power and getting more power and getting it back. So regardless of what party you're in, it's about the power. So if we introduce more voices, if we introduce more experiences, more backgrounds, more educations into the process, then maybe we can move beyond the battle for the power and into the battle for policy that actually moves people forward. Yeah? So how do we do that? Is everyone here ready to run for Congress? It's not necessarily, all the white guys are. So that's not necessarily the starting point for everyone, right? So how do you lead a political life? How do you work where you are, where you live, to try to get us to this point that we have diverse voices making our decisions? We have diverse minds and experiences wrapped around our problems. You can do that in a number of ways. I've already talked about some of the things that Grace Lee Boggs shared with us, and Martin Luther King, and Shirley Chisholm. But you can also do things like finding people to run for office, finding people to support for run for office. I would encourage, I'm not here to say that we don't ever need another rich, old, white, straight guy in office, but I would argue that it might be time for some of our rich, straight, white guy friends to take a step back, to look around the rooms that you are in, whether it's at work, whether it's in the community, whether you're actually serving in office, and figure out who's not at that table. Does everyone here look alike? Does everyone here think alike? Do we act alike? Do we have similar life experiences? Who is not here? Who has an experience and a voice that we need at this table? And then go invite them to be a part of that process. Whether that's inviting them into community spaces like we have here today, or inviting them into applying for jobs where you work so that they join the management team. Whether that's going out and talking to those people that you meet every day that you think, that is a really awesome person, and encouraging them to run for office. Because most people, particularly women, don't wake up in the morning and think, I'm going to run for office today, right? We don't see ourselves as experts like some guys do. I've been doing a lot of training lately around owning your expertise. And there's some research that, I read on the internet, so it may or may not be true. But there's research that a researcher went into a room full of women and asked them to raise their hands if they considered themselves an expert in breastfeeding. How many women here consider themselves an expert in breastfeeding? How many women here had children? This is what happens. Women, I don't know, I didn't breastfeed, I had trouble, I had to have a lactation specialist. She went into a room full of men and asked them to raise their hands if they were an expert in breastfeeding. And it was like, well, I was breastfed. My wife breastfed. I watched her do it all the time. Right? So it's about encouraging each other to see our experiences as expertise. So when you look around and you find those folks that you admire, those folks who are doing work that you think is important, call them experts. Help us authorize each other to be able to bring our expertise to the table, whether that's at work or whether that's in the community or in political leadership. So that's one way we can go about it. The other is to start acting politically ourselves. Now, when we had our small group meeting this morning, lots of ideas, there's a lot of smart people here. Lots of ideas were circulating. So there's the grand running for office. There's going to town hall meetings and taking the mic and speaking truth to power and asking really tough political questions of the people who lead us. But not everybody's ready to do that. So what are some other ways that you can lead a political life? Anyone? Shout it out. I don't need to be the only person talking. Vote. Show up to vote. Letters to the editor.
Be informed.
Be informed. Write your congressman. Phone calls. Donate. There are plenty of ways to lead a political life. And I would say that you can do that not only yourself, but with others. So if you're voting, take somebody with you. They don't necessarily have to be a voter, although that would be great if you took an additional voter. But you can bring future voters with you. There's all these beautiful children here today. If we take them to vote every time we vote, then they will grow up to be voters. Yeah? If we write letters to the editor, we don't always get published, but we can invite some friends over, and together we can each write our own independent letters to the editor. And one of us will get published eventually, right? We can write our congressman, we can march, we can rally. But most important, I think, is that we can show up at our civic institutions. And right now, there's a lot of conversation, there's a lot of attention being paid way up here at that House of White, right? And that's important. But there's a lot of work that we can do here at the community level. How many of you go to your city council or township board meetings? How many of you go to your county commission meetings? It's time for us to start paying attention to what's happening here locally. Because when you look at your local governments, you're going to see that, again, it is the same people who've been serving in office since the dawn of our democracy. So we should be asking questions at the local level. We could be fighting for change at the local level. We can be bringing diverse voices to the table at these conversations. There was just a video going around, I don't know if you all saw it, of the comedian Dave Chappelle Everyone know Dave Chappelle? Dave Chappelle lives in a small community in Ohio, and he just showed up at his city council meeting to give a statement. Everybody realizes you have the opportunity to do that, right? Every meeting of our government is open to the public, and at the local level, you have an opportunity on every meeting agenda to stand up and talk about concerns that you have. So Dave Chappelle came to talk about the police force and the opportunity that they had to be making a change in what was happening in his community. And I would encourage you to go watch that, because it's not a long speech, it's not full of research, it's not full of facts and figures. It is one man sharing his experience of growing up in that community and of bringing his family to events in that community and seeing what happens with the interaction with the police. And that's all we need to do. Show up and share your story, because that's what's going to start changing the world. I would also encourage us to start moving beyond our social media and our insular groups here and do what President Barack Obama encouraged us in his farewell address, that if you're tired of arguing with strangers on the internet, go talk to them in person. And we talked about that a little bit this morning in our small group conversation, about having these conversations, taking all of these big things that we're reading about and hearing about on CNN and MSNBC and Fox News, and instead concentrating at the local level. If we start going into our community, wherever we are, wherever we're working, at the diner you hang out at, whatever it is, and have conversations about what is happening here in our community and start connecting with each other one-on-one, that's how we're going to build change at the top. It's all going to lead to the top. So I would encourage you to find those opportunities to have those conversations, to make them deliberative conversations where you're actually asking questions, finding common ground, and sharing stories with each other. Because that's what it means to lead a political life, is to take yourself and put yourself in the community to create change, however that is that you're comfortable with. I will always say consider running for office, but maybe that's not your lot in life. Maybe you want to encourage other people to do so. And by doing that, we're not only changing the conversation we're having at the local level, but we're setting an example for everyone around us. So that all of those things that I learned growing up, that politics is bad, but community was good, I'll tell you today, I own a political consulting firm. Go figure. I talk to people all the time about running for office. I have conversations with people who represent voices and experiences that aren't at the table and talk to them about ways that they can bring those conversations to the table. I'm also the co-founder and the national board chair of an organization called Vote, Run, Lead, which is a national, nonpartisan nonprofit that is working to unleash the power of women in our democracy by encouraging them to run for office and to lead where they are. So that's where I ended up today. Now my mother, who way back when was complaining about that draft-dodging president, is now an almost daily caller to her congressman's office, and she is constantly writing letters to the editor, constantly talking to people wherever she is about politics. And my grandfather, who said that I had the degree in BS, he now, everywhere we go, whether we're talking to the diner waitress or his cardiologist, he now proudly introduces me as his granddaughter, the politician, right? And I will also tell you that this last fall, my niece, who was getting ready to head into middle school, because this is the family that we live in now, created her own campaign plan and knocked on her own doors to elect the president of her choosing, which didn't happen. But in the process, she was able to earn herself the opportunity to meet and get her picture taken with the first woman to win the popular election as president of the United States. So that was a proud Aunt Day right there. So just to sort of close things out here, Mary Oliver asks us, what is it that you will do with your one wild and precious life? And in addition to the other things that might have popped into your head, I would encourage you to lead a political life and to try to do those small things that will help get us closer to Martin Luther King's beloved community. Thank you.